Hello again, and welcome to the Prince Magnum channel. I'm your host, Prince Magnum. Welcome once again to In Your Face. It seems like a lot of people are really enjoying the old stories of the cars that I used to have back in the day. So we're going to continue with that. We're going to talk about the 1984 Buick Regal that I used to have, and this was the car that took over for Old Gold. Let me say up front, I am not a huge fan of Buick, but I love the Buick Regal's body style. It looks a lot like the Monte Carlos and the old Cutlasses of that time. And if you mention those cars, you definitely have to mention the Buick Regal as being a nice, good-looking car. Okay, as I said, Old Gold was done, and in the process of trying to track down the parts, and finally we just gave up. We started rebuilding some of the broken stuff on her old 283. We didn't know at that time that I was going to be basically pulling, that I was going to be pulling the engine and transmission and scrapping Old Gold. We didn't know that yet. Basically, what ended up happening was I had basically traded what was left of the power pack heads and an intake that I had gotten my hands on to my dad for a set of center bolt style 305 heads. And these were from around 1985, 1986, maybe 1987. I can't remember, but it's in that time frame. And these would actually accept the regular exhaust manifolds. I was really surprised at that. And we put those heads on the old 283. Very quickly, I want to give a special shout out to a subscriber, Troy. He actually asked the question, what were the size of the valves in the 283 with the power, the power pack heads for the 283. He asked the question, and I could not remember for the life of me. Just one of them things, time marched on, and I just didn't remember. So I actually had to look it up. And Troy, thank you for asking that question and making me think again. It means the world to me that you asked the right question and you made me think, and I had to go look something up, so I could get that information to you. So that's pretty cool that you did that. But anyhow, the center bolt heads were shaved 30,000, so it was a jump in performance. That ups your compression ratio for those who don't know. And to my knowledge, they were. My dad had those done, kind of like you did the old big valve heads. So it was like the old 202 heads from back in the day. And we, he of course hardened valve seats. They were set up just right. We put those in there and put everything, put that back together. But because these were center bolt style heads, I needed a different intake. Could no longer use the original LT1. 350 intake. So I went over to Napa in Farmington and was able to get my hands on the YN Stealth intake manifold. This intake is good from idle to 7,000 RPM. And YN is also owned by Holley. So automatically Holley carburetors are what typically fits on there. What I did, though, was because I wanted to continue running the old Rochester Quadrajet, I bought an adapter plate, and it allowed me to use the Rochester Quadrajet, which the Quadrajet that was on the 283, which was the original carburetor that came with Old Gold. I ended up swapping that out for a different one that had a manual choke, and it was still a Rochester Quadrajet, but it was from the 60s, and swapped it out for that, and it worked. It worked great. It worked just fine. Slap that on the old 283. She ran like a champ. Actually, it ran a lot You could tell it ran a lot more powerful than it did before, but unfortunately, it didn't run as smooth as it did with the Power Pack heads, amazingly enough. So I don't know why, but it ran just fine, you know. Um, in the process of this, like I said, we discovered that we could no longer keep old gold on the road, so I began searching. And at one point, I almost, uh, this video almost ended up being about an 81 El Camino, but that didn't work out. Basically, that deal fell through, and I ended up losing out on $600, which pissed me off. But that wasn't going to deter me, and just haphazardly, I was at a scrapyard. Just an old friend of the family was talking to him, and someone pulled in and was getting ready to scrap a 1984 Buick Regal. At first glance, it didn't look like much. Basically, it was your run-of-the-mill two-door Buick Regal from back in the day. It was maroon, had a maroon interior, but the doors on it were white because they were actually off of an old Cutlass. Which, if you know about that time frame, that's you could do that. The stuff, all that stuff would interchange. It had a Buick 3.8 V6, and it had a metric 3-speed automatic, which was basically, as far as its engine and transmission, it was a piece of crap. It just really wasn't worth mentioning. But I bought the car for $400. We hooked it to Dad's truck, towed it home. Immediately, the work started happening. I pulled the American racing wheels from Old Gold, slapped them on there. So now I was running 15s, got it running. That only took me 2 days, and I wasn't even working that consistent. It only took me 2 days. I knew the engine was okay, and in the worst case scenario, I was already thinking 283, 283. We already knew that was going to be a thing down the road. What ended up happening though, as I was driving it, I got with a gal. Things started happening, and I got custody of my son, and things kind of slowed down a minute, but it was still, everything was still happening. A lot was happening. So basically, at this time, the Regal was really only for cruising. When the transmission started going out, I sent it off and had the 283 as it was with her 350 turbo B&M shift improvement kit installed into the car. Right away, this was this was a game changer. But again, I wasn't doing any racing. I didn't do anything crazy. To me, it was just a cruiser. To me, I felt those days were over. Okay, so now I've got the 283 in there, and the first thing we had to do, we had to cut a hole in the hood because the Buick Regals did not have the bump in the hood like the Grand Nationals. So there was no hood clearance. I had to cut a hole in the hood, and her air cleaner actually stuck up through the hood a little ways. One of them things, just one of them things. And I initially was going to put a hood scoop on there. I just never got around to it. Just one of them things, I had to have custom exhaust put on there, and basically it was your typical Chevy small block 2.5-inch exhaust. It ran through again MagnaFlow catalytic converters, bought brand new, right through Thrush turbo mufflers straight out the back, and she had an amazing sound. Again, she wasn't a ground stomper. The gears in the rear end I kept the same, and again 241 single track rear end. 15-inch tires and wheels, American racing wheels, their version of the rally wheels. Really no frills and excitement. I just drove it. It was the car that got me to and from work. When things went sour in the relationship, and again, I was a single father raising a son on my own. We went up to Washington, Washington, Missouri. I was living with my mom and my stepdad, and trying to figure out what I was going to do and everything. Was working at a radio factory. It was awesome. I had even though it wasn't fixed up, I mean, it was one of the coolest cars in town. Everyone was like, wow, look at that car, look at what he's doing, it looks so good, things like that. it was just a nice, comfortable ride. It was a lot of fun to drive. Unfortunately, the day came, some crazy college kid rear-ended the car, and he hit me on basically hit the corner of the driver's side trunk lid and sheared the body panel up the side. And the weight of his car, plus that, it was a total. Um, Kind of hurt my back pretty bad. I mean, I got rear-ended hard, and so it was a total. We had we had the car towed home, and um, this is where the story really gets kind of interesting. My son, like I said, being a single dad, I was asleep on the couch because I worked night shift, and I was actually on my way to pick up my paycheck. My son comes, my son's having breakfast, and I'm asleep on the couch, and my mom is explaining to my son um, that I was in an accident, that the Buick is, totaled, and he didn't understand. Well, Dad can fix it. Dad can fix it, and she's like, I don't think he can fix this. And finally, around noon, Mom had to come and wake me up, and I had to take my son out there. And on the way out, I said, Son, I don't think I can fix this. He said, You can fix it, Dad. You can fix it. We got out there, and he got one look at the Buick, and he immediately started crying, saying somebody broke the Buick. This was heartbreaking for my son. He actually loved that car. I had actually started teaching my son how to work on cars. He was like, 4 years old, and I was taking him out there. Shoot, he, quote unquote, helped me change the oil one day. We changed. I think something was wrong, and one of my windows, my passenger window was slightly off track, so we had to take the door panel off and, fix it. And I had him handing me bolts and screws and everything, and it was really cool, because I was teaching him how to do, things that my dad had taught me how to do. And he actually knew more about that car than probably I did, which was scary. That he always told everybody that was his car. That was going to be his car one day, and I knew I had to keep it on the road. Unfortunately, it didn't work out that way. So it really devastated my son. And just for the record, to this day, he keeps saying, this is, he's 10 years old. I'm sorry, he's 10 years old. 5 kids. What do you expect? It's hard to keep track of everybody's, how old everyone is. He actually, to this day, like I said, he was 4 when this happened, and now he still tells people he's going to have a Buick Regal like his dad used to have, and he wants one with a 283 and a 350 turbo. So that's what, it wasn't, it was no really awesome stories to tell him. Sorry, just the way it is, but the cool part about it is I was teaching my son things that I had learned from my dad and spending time with him. And if all of my kids were here, I would do that with Project Spirit right now. So let me go ahead and tell you all probably the funniest story, and of this whole mess. Well, two funny stories. Number one, when because the kid rear-ended me, it was his fault. An insurance representative came out to look at the car and make assessments. Because of its age, we did not think we were going to get that much money. I was thinking maybe $100 to $200, and the insurance agent said, "84 Buick Regal. I don't believe I've seen one of those in a long time." I said, "Well," I said, "You're in for a treat then." We walked up there, and the first thing she noticed was the dual pipes sticking out the back. I'm sorry, no. She noticed that second. She looked over and she's seeing the custom rally wheels, and she's like, "Chrome wheels? What size are those?" I said, "15s." And she said, "Okay, so this is not just some old car, is it?" I said, "Well, I'll let you decide." Just smiling, evil grin from ear to ear. And she said, "Okay." And we get back there, and she see the dual pipes sticking out the back just a smidge, and she's like, "Dual exhaust?" I said, "Yeah, that's 2.5-inch dual exhaust." And she said, "You're not telling me anything." And I said, I think you're, I said, I think you're starting to see. I was just playing. I didn't mean no harm. She knew I was teasing. And then finally we get around to the front of the car. And she said, is that a decal? I said, no, that's the air cleaner sticking up through the hood just a bit. She said, all right, what are you not telling me? I said, it's a project car. I said, this is a custom car. And she's like, pop the hood and let me see. And when I popped the hood and she seen that custom built 283, she's like, oh my God, I have never seen anything like this in a daily driver. And I said, you like it? She's like, it's beautiful. I've never seen an engine like it. She's like, I said, would you like to hear it run? And she's like, yes. I started it up. She's like, she didn't know what to think. And she was like, how much is this engine worth? And I told her what it was and gave her, got the casting numbers and everything. And she asked me the question, how much is this engine worth? I said, well, I can tell you how much I have in it, and I can tell you how much it's worth to a collector. And she said, okay, how much money do you have tied up in it? And I said, I've got about $4,000 tied up in the engine. And I said, and I had to explain to her how that came about. And she's like, so this is a completely rebuilt I said, yes. And she's like, wow. And then she said, how much is it worth? I said, to a collector, which it's more now, but at that time I said anywhere from $8,000 to $10,000. And she about nearly fell over backwards. So at that point, she's like, I'm going to see if I can get you more money, which she did. She actually got me for over $2,000 for the car, and as a total, and they let me buy the car back for $75. Pretty awesome. So if she ever comes across this video, thank you for doing that, taking care of me like that. So that was pretty much the end of the Regal. And of course, the last little story I want to tell you all about. Like I said, my son was very attached to this car. I had bought an '87 Olds Cutlass to replace it, and we were in a shop, and the gentleman behind the counter, who also owned the shop, Carriage Care up in Washington, Missouri. Him and I were talking, and I was kind of playing like I was dumb, like I was, even though at that time I was 31. I was kind of playing it dumb, like, I was just some dumb young man in my 20s, and to see if he would rip me off. And of course he really couldn't, because my son ratted me out. He looks at the man and he says, somebody broke my daddy's Buick. And he's like, well, he said, we're not working on your daddy's Buick. We're working on your daddy's Oldsmobile. That's why you're working on his Oldsmobile. Somebody broke my daddy's Buick. And he's like, oh, and what kind of Buick was it? And my son says, well, it was a 1984 Buick Regal with a custom-built Chevy 283 from 1965. It was bored 30 over, had 8.2 to 1 pistons in it, oversized. It had an RV cam, and he just kept going on and on and on. And the man was sitting there with his jaw on the floor, and he's like, wait a minute. He's like, you are not telling me something. And I kind of looked down at the floor, and I basically confessed everything that I knew. He's like, so basically, he's like, you know everything wrong with that car before we even pull it in here. I said, yeah, pretty much. And he's like, why didn't you just tell me that? I said, I wanted to see if I can trust you. He's like, somebody ripped you off before? I said, I've had people try. And he's like, smart man. So they did the inspection, and that was the last real good story of the old Buick Regal. But it was heartbreaking. But, one of them things. All right, that brings us to the end of this episode of In Your Face. If you enjoyed this story, would like to hear more stories about other cars, continue hitting the like button and ask about it. I'll be glad to tell you all about it. And then, if you're not subscribed to the Prince Magnum channel, why not? I believe there's something on here for everybody. If you're going to leave any hateful comments, one of two things. Either A, I'm going to delete it. B, I'm going to make fun of you. Depends on my mood that day. Got another one I've got to, set straight. And again, as always, get out there and work on a project. I don't care what it is, just do something with yourself. If you got a sweetheart, sweep them off their feet. They deserve it. They put up with us. And as always, I don't care who you are, even if you're a hater. If nobody has told you that they love you today, Prince Magnum does. God bless you and have a happy 24. Thank you.
Good night, ladies.